Guess who saw a really stupid video? I did. Hey, what's up? It's Mabasei and I'm back. Let's do this.
I certainly agree. Just let me go grab my bleach real quick.
We love safe spaces, right? Who doesn't love a good old-fashioned safe space? And segregation, because, well, they fall hand in hand, really, don't they? Black students demand segregated spaces from white students. If we take that sentence and switch black and white, it's considered massively racist and unacceptable in our current times. But this is considered progressive. I can imagine all those civil rights activists from the 50s are rolling in their graves right now. You know, the ones that fought for educational segregation to be abolished.
So right off the bat, we're off to a bad start. Someone seems to think that actually people were fighting against educational segregation for simply just the principle. Not true. Not true at all. For the most part, it was fought against because separate was not equal. Not necessarily just because being separated is inherently not equal because you can't go to a certain place, right? As because it just wasn't an equal education. If things were actually kept on the up and up, a lot of people probably would not have even necessarily complained about that aspect to segregation. But due to poor education and certain resources not being allocated to black communities, the people had an issue.
The Supreme Court case Brown versus the Board of Education ruled in favor of the integrationists, which was the majority opinion positing that separate cannot be equal. In essence, when you separate people into two groups, one is going to be inherently unequal. Only when all parties have equal opportunity to access to these facilities do you get equality. This is in addition to a quote, which we will see at the end of the video, from Martin Luther King, which showed just how wrong this fucker is. Now, some civil rights movement leaders did advocate segregation, such as Malcolm X before his Hajj and Elijah Muhammad, who was so racist that Black Lives Matter would tell him to chill the fuck out, but these were not majority opinions from the civil rights movement.
And respect. You never expect to get anywhere, you don't demand to get anywhere, you earn it. But these people are demanding segregation from white students. That either implies a huge problem with how they are being treated, or they just want space away from white people for the sake of it. I guess we'll only know for certain when we get further into this article. Black college students across the country have demanded that they be segregated from white peers, calling for safe spaces on campuses meant only for so-called students of color. Am I the only person that gets mildly irritated when I hear black people speaking on behalf of all people of color? As if people of color that are not black can't speak on issues themselves.
So, yeah, this weird foil with the word people of color and him taking a really long time to get to the point of the video. And still waiting on you to talk about the actual demands for segregation. But on the people of color thing. So person of color used to be a word that mostly just meant black. That just meant black people. That never meant people who were brown, people who were yellow.
Conveniently ignores that Hispanics, Asians, and Indians faced many of the same prejudices and were made to sit in colored sections of restaurants, theaters, buses, etc. He also seems to have forgotten that the Japanese were so discriminated against that they were forced into camps while their brothers and fathers fought in a war for what they saw as their country, with their unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, becoming the most decorated unit of the war.
And it also encompassed folks like me. I think PC wussies call us biracial. I prefer mulatto because it just sounds cooler. What is the biracial? I don't even know I'm only biracial. I could be like 3 or 4, you know. You can't just look at my parents and just throw me in a box. That's not fair.
I racially identify as a space shuttle door gunner. Get on my level.
Kind of moot to the context of what's happening here. So yeah.
2. We demand free tuition for black and indigenous students. Get fucked. If I have to pay off tuition fee loans, you have to pay off tuition fee loans. We all do. 3. We demand a
Why not make it free just for everybody instead of having people being crippled by debt?
Because a professor paid a government wage will do government work. Because I don't want the same people who run the post office to run the school I'm getting an education at. Because Bernie Sanders has about as much understanding of economics as I do of high-level quantum physics. because there is about $3 billion worth of unclaimed scholarship money every year, because there already is a place where you can get college for free, because we are currently hemorrhaging money and are running on a debt that will lead to either drastic austerity measures or massive inflation, and cannot afford to pay for your special snowflake gender studies degree.
From prisons and an investment in communities. As far as demands go, that one's one of my favourites. It's quite an amusing one, to be honest. Almost like it implies something. Now, what could it possibly be implying? I'm going to leave a link to this below because 8 universities have a link to demands. If you're really bored, go through them. But as we go through this article, we're going to be addressing a couple of the universities anyway that have the more extreme demand.
I think it implies that America has the most incarcerated people, amount of incarcerated people on the fucking planet right now, despite it not really having to. And there's quite a bit of corrupt bullshit that goes on behind the scenes that keeps it that way. And throwing people in prison doesn't really do anything, but investing in ways to rebuild shit communities does help to drive down crime. I can't really think of anything else that it could imply, unless you were, for some odd reason, incredibly racist.
So, in other words, I don't have proof beyond outcomes, so this must be racism in play. It couldn't be the rise of crack gangs destroying the inner city, causing inner city politicians, black inner city politicians, to advocate for extremely harsh punishments for crack dealing, leading to said high incarceration rates, along with Bill Clinton's crime bill, which made crack dealing a federal crime. No, it has to be because of racism. Oh, and as for investing in black communities, they won't want that as soon as the improvements raise the property values of the communities, making it more expensive and driving out the existing population in favor of a slightly more wealthy one. Then they will bitch about gentrification.
Thinking about, I don't know, crime statistics or something. Well, you wouldn't do that, would you?
Emphasis on demands, because I really don't like it. It's like, every time I hear, we demand this, we demand that, I think of hostage situations. I can't imagine why.
Probably because you're a paranoid right-wing reactionary fuckwit. That's probably why. Either that or because you're racist and you're thinking of something.
Demands have been presented to campus administrators and are chronicled by thedemands.org, a website run by a racial advocacy group called the Black Liberation Collective. Not all of the 76 demand lists, each from a different university, seek segregated spaces, but several do. When you hear about demands being put forth by racial groups, you know it's not truly representative of everyone. But then the idea that someone has privilege over others because of the colour of their skin, the power in their skin, is rather stupid and getting redundant when privileges are being granted to others to elevate them without them having to earn anything. Now soon we're going to go through some of the demands put forth, and some of them are just ridiculous.
We talk about white privilege for whatever reason and equate people asking for things or making demands or whatever and equate that to privilege when the privilege has not even been granted, because a lot of these schools have not even lived up to these demands.
Because if this was a group of white students doing this, no one would hesitate to call them what they are: racists.
So what I've seen, like, the demands have been made and they've been submitted, but most of them, just about all of them, even the ones with a lot of these somewhat of more extreme and somewhat just flat out silly demands, have not actually gotten any goddamn where. So how are they being granted something that they don't have to earn? That it hasn't been granted from what I'm reading and what I looked into. No place has actually granted them. There's been requests for them all over the place, but they have not been granted. So it's really weird to say that they've been granted when they haven't. So are you just ignorant or are you a fucking liar? 2, white privilege is a thing. Are you... Here's just a clear case that is just undeniable. If you deny this, you're just fucking stupid or just being obtuse. In society, it is okay to stereotype blacks, Asians, Arabs, and whatever kind of non-white person, right? Like, you can say Asians do this, blacks do that, those Mexicans, you can do that stuff, whether it be in jest, whether it be in malice. You can do that. But the minute you do it to white people, such as we see the backlash to certain things when people generalize white people, such as, all white people are racist, etc. There's a major backlash to that. People are very upset about that. Even people who aren't white are, jump to defend white people from that accusation. Yes? Yes. So it would seem that you have a certain privilege in this society that when someone makes a sweeping generalization about you and a certain behaviors that you exhibit, that people will, dispute it. There'll be people will take up their sword and shield, they'll white knight for you, they'll climb to the highest mountains and scream #not all. And that's a privilege. People don't do that. If we're going to be specific to this context of this conversation, people don't do that for black people, right? You just say they like chicken, like, sounds about right. The criminals, sounds about right, whatever. Like, no one cares. That is a privilege. We could just really keep going with this, but that should be a clear-cut example of what is being communicated to anyone who isn't a fucking ideologue.
And I'm looking forward to ripping into him because I think there's something obviously wrong, as if the irony of separating people based on race isn't bad enough. But this just gets even worse for you. At UCLA, the African Student Union is insisting upon an African diaspora floor as well as an Afro house. It's not like there are facilities available already for people to be able to integrate better into the culture of Los Angeles, which, if a diaspora house exists in, must imply that Los Angeles is somewhat intolerant already, which in itself is rather stupid considering how multicultural it is. Now, as I'm rather special and don't have an afro, I can only guess what an Afro house is. It is either a house for those with afros, and afros of course only the property of black people, although I have seen white people with afros, ginger ones no less. Or it is Afro house, a style of music. I'm hoping the former, but it's most likely the latter. Learned to like metal, it is superior to house music. Black students lack spaces.
So, you're not funny? And I really wish, what is with white people in thinking that the white ginger and sometimes just curly-haired white people have are afros? Those are not afros. The things you see on the screen now are afros. Afro is short for African, just like Afro-American.
Afro, sometimes abbreviated to fro, and also known as a natural, is a hairstyle worn naturally by people with lanky, kinky hair texture, or specifically styled in such a fashion by individuals with naturally curly or straight hair. The hairstyle is created by combing the hair all the way to the scalp, allowing the hair to extend out from the head in a large, round shape, much like a cloud or ball. Unfortunately for you, being black is not a requirement to have an afro, you racist shitlord. And I know what you're going to say, but afro is short for African American. But apparently you don't understand etymology and how words change over the course of time and population.
Because something's multicultural doesn't mean that there are necessarily spaces where all cultures can be talked about and celebrated, right? If they're in Los Angeles, you do know that that city is like way more Latino than it is black, or it's way more Latino than it is white. Like, what are you even talking about? What do you even mean? Do you even know what you're saying right now? Like did you even research anything about LA? Like, are you serious? Like, this guy can't be fucking serious.
Where they feel safe and comfortable, the UCLA demands state. If black students don't feel safe, rather than creating safe spaces or exclusionary environments which will inevitably create more racially based problems, would it not be wiser to show how inclusive the campus already is without pandering to groups that will make an already progressive environment look like it is still in the 40s? The African Diaspora Floor is a way for us to connect more to other black students, the African Student Union and the Afro AM department. I feel like my previous comment covers this sufficiently. However, I'm up for a bit of a ramble on this subject. When you go out of your way to create a space or multiple spaces races designed to give people of other races freedom to embrace heritage and make it seem like their identity is solely about their skin and not something unique to them, i.e. they are drawn to their skin and their character and choices are not their own. I have zero problem with people embracing their heritage. I'm English and very proud of that, but universities are places of learning and not of pandering to groups that have been misled and are being made to be scared of isolated instances and bogus propaganda that is being passed off as fact.
Isolated instances. So, since we found out that the orange-faced Fuhrer is going to be our next president, there's been a spike in hate crimes. Now, some have been one specific that comes to mind, it's been confirmed as not real. But just by the law of averages, some of those are real. And that means that there's been a spike in the attack on minorities, right? Or people with minority identities, right? Like maybe gay or something like that, right? That's not propaganda. That's a fact. And you have to think about these things also. These are young people. I myself am 22. I have no idea how old you are. But if you think about the spaces online that we occupy, think about all the things that you've seen, said, and all that stuff online. It'd be absolutely intellectually dishonest that you've never seen anything that was just outright, totally racist towards either white people, black people, whatever.
These are words on a screen. They mean nothing. Get over it.
So, for me, it seems really stupid to attempt to say that, oh, they're being misled by the media. Like, no, they could be being influenced by their own eyeballs, stuff that they see, like maybe even just like right here on YouTube. Like there is literally.
They are pictures on a screen and sounds from a speaker. They mean nothing. Get over it.
A guy who's implicitly advocating a violent revolution to achieve ethno-nationalism. I'm sorry, but especially given these instances of people randomly calling people nigger and vandalizing certain things, burning people's houses down, like that happened. That's a real thing. A black guy who was a firefighter, no less, had his house burned down because he was black. These people have actual things to be afraid of. When the black crime rate is on a downturn, but the violence and especially killings by cops is on an uptick, right? On a disproportionate uptick, you have something to be scared of. That means that it's very likely that even though you're very unlikely to be a person who's done anything or doing anything that warrants killing you, you could die. That is a thing that should scare people. If they did not react to it, I would wonder what the fuck's wrong with their head. Who the fuck could see cases like Sandra Bland, Rukia Boyd, Tamir Rice, and just myriad of videos that we can just find online with like just random like minorities and especially black people, as particularly black males, being killed while doing essentially nothing to threaten the officer. It makes sense. And then the backlash from especially people who are more so on the right, like defending these people even when they're wrong, even in cases where we know their shooting was unjustified, there was no reason to shoot that person, such as the Slager and the Scott thing. There is literally some white people and a black sellout, let's not forget him, who did not feel as if they could come to a fucking guilty verdict on Slager's case. They said they couldn't convict him. We have him on video and it stops dead in his tracks. Like, it's just frustrating. Like, I'm not chasing this guy. Unloads a clip into his back. And there are people still residing in this country, walking right next to, their black asses, who would defend someone who did something like that.
floor should be branded as a safe space for all black students. Earlier this article mentioned people of color. Now we have UCLA having demands made of them to create exclusively black environments. As California has quite a big racial demographic, will UCLA also pander to other races to give them spaces of their own, or are only black students making the demands? As for the creation and support of a UCLA Afro House, the demands state many black students cannot afford to live in Westwood with the high prices of rent. An Afro House would provide a cheaper alternative housing solution for black students that would also serve as a safe space for black Bruins to congregate and learn from each other. Now, I am all for supporting anyone that has problems being able to support themselves to an extent, but if you choose to go to UCLA, you already know that it will get costly. You could have chosen another college. I'm not now trying to say that black people need to get out of LA because they're poor. No, I apply this to anyone that chooses a college that they cannot afford to go to or live by. This includes all that they are entitled to loan and grant-wise, and even family support if any, of course. The fact is, only the truly disadvantaged should get any help or assistance, but they should consider other and more reasonably priced colleges and accommodation first. This should apply to anyone of any race and not a single racial group because oppressed.
So for some reason you're equating like these people making these demands with them saying that only they should get them. Nowhere in the article or in the demands did it say that. It said that they want these things for black people.
So the further you go into this video, the more you realize just what a nutcase and how uninformed this guy is. He thinks the KKK, which has a max of 5,000 people, somehow infiltrated the police forces, of which there are almost over 1 million people and are spread over 1,000 different agencies and jurisdictions, and other unfounded accusations. But this is it for me. I've watched it almost a dozen times, my head hurts from the face palms, and it would just get painful to watch, and it would ultimately be pointless. Now, I did promise an MLK quote, and here it is.
That note, let's read one of the most appropriate Martin Luther King quotes. Segregation not only harms one physically but injures one spiritually. It scars the soul. It is a system which forever stares the segregated in the face, saying you are less than, you are not equal to. Professor